We're here in Baltimore right now to support local organizations like Baltimore United for Change in helping to develop and build the movement that is growing here in Baltimore, Maryland, and increasingly the movement that is growing across the country. What we know, right, is that there is a Black Spring that is emerging where communities who have been under the boot of police terrorism, communities who have been attacked by poverty and unemployment are rising up, coming together and advancing new solutions, and new visions and new demands to create a new world where Black people's lives matter. You know, I think the state attorney's announcement today was very important, and as a Black woman I can say that I felt personally that sister was really opening a door for young people here to advance a new set of demands that changes the landscape here in Baltimore. What I heard from her was that she was going to commit to holding officers accountable, but what we know right now is that that's just the beginning of the fight, and quite frankly it's not about targeting individual officers. What we see here is that there is a pattern of corruption. We see here that there is a pattern of a lack of transparency and accountability, and we also see here that there is a pattern of the criminalization of poverty and of Black people. And so what's important about today's announcement, quite frankly, is that it started the road to justice, but if we want justice for Freddie Gray, we also understand that we need to make sure that people have access to food. We need to make sure that people have access to quality education. We need to make sure that occupying forces leave Black communities and allow Black communities to thrive on our own terms. When communities are occupied by forces like the National Guard, essentially what they're doing is they're standing between Black people and access to resources. They're protecting property rather than protecting the very people that make this city beautiful. And that is why this is a Black Spring, because quite frankly, communities who have been under the boot of occupying forces like the military and the local police department are rising up and saying we've had enough. And that is being led by young people, that is being led by women, even though you may not be seeing that on television. That is what's happening. I heard reports last night of a young girl, 17 years old, who was facing the police very courageously. So what we see here, right, in terms of a Black Spring, is people rising up together and saying enough is enough. We have a new vision for what the city can and should look like, and we don't need occupying forces to keep us from our vision. So the first step in healing, quite frankly, is elevating the truth. And part of where so much of the grief and the pain and the rage comes from is that for generations, what police are doing in Black communities has been swept under the rug, and quite frankly, it's been justified by the forces that be here in this city and across the nation. So the first step to healing, quite frankly, is elevating the truth of what's happening in Black communities. We know that what happened to Freddie Gray was not an isolated incident, and in fact, the state attorney's announcement this morning identified a practice known as rough rides here in Baltimore, where folks are thrown into the back of paddy wagons and then taken on rides where they're thrown against the walls of the vans that they're being carried in. Then they're being placed in jail cells and being held without charges, quite frankly. And then as they're in jail for 2 or 3 days, they're losing their jobs, they're losing their income, and then they're released oftentimes with no charges, right? What we're also seeing here, and another kind of path to healing, right, is making sure that people have the economic resources that they need in order to thrive and not just survive. What we're hearing in West Baltimore is that folks didn't have access to food before, and then of course one of the impacts of the uprising is that some of the limited places that people had access to food have been destroyed. And so we need to make sure that there's emergency funding, right, for people to be able to receive the resources that they need. But again, the first step to healing and reconciliation is truth. And so we need to tell the truth about the way that racism is impacting Black communities in this country. And then we need to do things like make it right. Invest in Black communities and make sure that we have the resources that we need to thrive. Make sure that Black children have access to education. Make sure that police are not occupying forces in our communities. And in fact, support Black communities determining for ourselves what kinds of things make our communities safe. Make sure that people have access to jobs and economic opportunities. Those are some of the core pieces that are going to lead us to healing in this country.